Welcome back to the Bernard Lee Poker Show. This has become an annual tradition, and I love it. And so guess what? We're going to do it. It's my show. I can do whatever I want. And these two gentlemen are going to join me until they say they can't stand me anymore. And hopefully that won't be the case. But we are enjoying our time together always. And we are going to wrap up 2022 WSOP. Very pleased to once again have my two colleagues, Chad Holloway, who is the executive editor US of PokerNews, and also Robbie Strazynski, who is the owner of CardplayerLifestyle.com. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And as we said, wanted to kind of wrap up 2022 WSOP. It's been a little bit of time, but it allows everyone to kind of soak everything in, think about it all. And I think the first thing that I want to talk about is something that I have talked about on the show, had multiple interviews with multiple players about it, dedicated almost half of a show just on this topic, of the impressions of the WSOP move from Rio to Bally's Paris. Eventually it'll be Horseshoe Paris. 17-year run at the Rio. Obviously prior to that was Binion's. I'll kind of give my first impressions and then I'll pass it over to Chad and then Robbie. I had a lot of people who were very cautiously optimistic to pessimistic, in all honesty. I had a couple of people who I interviewed that said, "Oh, this is going to be horrible. You know, how can you make that big of a move over there?" But in all honesty, I think it was unbelievably smooth. I know that there was some issues with the air conditioning at Bally's during the first week. Beyond that, honestly, I don't really know of any other major issues that they had. And if everyone had been at the Rio, you know that if you go to the, souvenir area, there's never a sweatshirt to be found because it's so freaking cold in there. So it was pleasant. I actually wore shorts playing. I never in my time at the Rio wore shorts or barefoot flip-flops. My feet would just be frozen. But I wore shorts, didn't wear flip-flops, but I wore shorts and didn't have to always bring some kind of a sweatshirt when I played. So yes, I understand Bally's had some issues, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been. And it was fixed, obviously, fairly quickly. Chad, what about your impressions?
Yeah, I think like so many others, I had concerns going in, but those concerns were pretty quickly alleviated. And I think it went better than even the best hopes and projections. My biggest concern was parking. And
Yeah.
that turned out to be, as somebody who went there in my own vehicle every day, was never an issue. Even
Wow.
during those weekends with the massive turnouts, there was always space. I found it very convenient. And as soon as that first big weekend was, it came and went, and there was no parking issues, no other issues, I said, okay, this is going to be a good summer. And it was. And that was reflected in, you didn't hear anybody saying, oh, I missed the Rio. It was, they were really enjoying the new venue. I really enjoyed it. You know, the Rio had its moments, but I was excited to be at a new place, to get to know it. And I'm very excited for the future of it because I had many conversations with staff. They were talking about the logistics of, how they get the chips from point A to point B and the different cages. And they were talking about how much they were learning from the problems that they had. And I thought that was interesting in that it didn't seem like there was any problems to me and the media, to the players. So anything that was happening was behind the scenes. And then it was exciting to hear that they were already looking forward to the future and how to address those problems. Because to me, that means moving forward, once they iron out those small wrinkles that they had logistically, it's just going to make for a better player experience. It means they're going to be able to circulate in and out players and chips more. So that just means the numbers will hopefully continue to grow. And then just real quick, props to Jack Effel, Ty Stewart,
100%.
Greg Shoshone. Those guys, they hosted 2 World Series of Pokers in basically 10 months at 2 different venues and had to navigate the challenges of moving from point A to point B in between. They did a stellar job. I was super impressed.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Yeah. Robbie, what's your thought?
Yeah, definitely got to echo your guys' sentiments. Just what impressed me the most was just how seamless It was, like I was only there for about a 2 week stretch, but everything just kind of made sense. If you think of the overall progression, 50 plus years of the World Series of Poker, and like it's in its infancy when not too many people are showing up, that's in Binions. It grows up a little bit more like it's teenage, adolescent, 20s, 30s kind of years. It's at the Rio for all those things. And then all of a sudden it's okay. This is a mature thing. Poker is no longer, in the boom years, but it's like, okay, it's an established thing. The numbers are back to what they were from, pre-pandemic. And as Chad had pointed to, within 10 months, to move poker's premier event from its long established, it's been there for so many years location to the new location and have a nearly seamless execution of that was just, it blew me away, especially considering just how much everyone was so concerned about the parking, about all that stuff. And it's like they completely prepared for it. I love that. Also, they got ahead of things as well. They gave all of the media folks who would be there the entire summer, like a tour of the venues. They were very proactive about trying to help with all of those sorts of things. I think they even had Norman Chan and Lon McCarran. They produced like this video for folks flying in who aren't there. It was really great, and just got to echo those massive kudos to Jack, Ty, Gregory, the whole WSOP staff. The one thing that I felt was just not bad, but just unusual as opposed to the Rio was the fact that at the Rio, it was purely poker in the convention halls. Whereas when you're moving from Paris to Bally's or back and forth, you're kind of like walking through a casino, which was a little bit strange, but not bad. It was just a little, different thing to get used to. Other than that, it made sense. Like it's like it belonged there all of these years. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think one thing is maybe that there's a back connection, because I think those convention centers are somewhat connected. So that would be nice. The other thing for me is that, the Rio always had issues with the bathroom, right? It was always a problem. You'd have to literally leave 2-3 minutes early if you wanted to go to the bathroom quickly, or you'd have to go all the way somewhere else. If you ever went back to your room, you literally went to the bathroom and were racing back. This Bally's, if I was in Bally's, I timed it, went from the poker room to my room in about 5 minutes. And my room was not at the beginning of the hallway. It was fairly down, maybe 2/3 the way down. And afterward, I literally looked at my watch going, I actually can sit here for about 5 to 8 minutes and just relax, decompress, and then go back. If you did want to go to the bathroom down there, actually, there were plenty of bathrooms. There was actually a couple of sneaky ones, aka in the main, where the mothership was.
I have to tell you, I haven't told anybody this, but since you're talking about it, I literally just pulled it up on my phone. I took notes of the bathrooms, WSOP bathrooms. I have one near Bally's. It had 14 urinals and 12 stalls. The Bally's across from the Platinum, 12 urinals, 11 stalls. Near the feature table room, which was one of the secret ones, 18 urinals and 15
that was the secret one.
Yeah. And so my plan was I was going to count all the urinals and stalls in both, nearby in Paris and Bally's, and then make my way over to the Rio and count what was there. I never got around to that part of it, but I was curious because it's a lot more. The bathrooms, like parking was not an issue. I didn't feel the bathrooms was an issue for the most part either.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think that you also have 2 casinos and people are going to two bathrooms, right? Because if you think about it, everyone who was at Bally's and Paris, they would all be at the Rio, and they'd all be converging onto these bathrooms. So like you said, the one in the main area where the mothership was, that was a secret one. Like I'd always walk in there and be like, there's no one here. And we're literally, everyone went on break. The one right outside of Bally's, like you come in the corridor and then you turn right around, there's one right there, no one even knows about it because it's part of the casino. So that was definitely, I would say the only thing that I miss is I love the Rio size of the rooms. That's just me. I like having that kind of big room where I can like lie down on the couch and not feel like I'm next to my bed, like you feel like you're in a quote unquote suite. I like that. Again, that's a very minor thing. Bally's rooms were nice. It wasn't a problem. And then, of course, you had all the food options you could have imagined. I mean, whatever you wanted.
On the hotel front, I didn't see the Bally's room, so I can't comment on that. But what I do know is that the bank of elevators to the Bally's hotel rooms was right there. So you could
Yep.
foreseeably go from
Yeah.
a break up to your room.
That's what I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and you couldn't do that at the Rio. The rooms
No
were
way.
just too far away.
No way. Yeah, no way. So kudos to them. It all worked out. We're looking forward to the improvements from here. Imagine more improvements. It'll be great. We have found our home, at least for the foreseeable future, for the WSOP. Let's talk about some stories that stood out for you. Let's not talk about the main event necessarily, but any other stories that might have stood out for you. Robbie, you want to kick that off?
Yeah, so there were a couple definitely stood out. One is, it's almost like there was so much news at the World Series. You have to remember, oh, this happened, and on its own, if the World Series weren't going on, it would just be dominating all the headlines, right?
Yeah.
So you got Dan Jungleman Cates, Macho Man Dan repeating in the 50K Poker Players Championship back-to-back. To do any event back-to-back in the World Series is a tremendous achievement. Like the John Smith Invitational, the Heads Up, that sort of thing. But
there you go. Yeah, yeah.
back-to-back in the Poker Players Championship, when literally the best in the world are there playing all of the variants. Nothing, it's an incredibly impressive achievement. So definitely grabbed headlines, and appropriately so. And it kind of like, it's become, we'll talk about this later about the whole Adam Friedman thing, but like, oh, okay, he's now the man to beat. Dan Cates is like, he's almost like the favorite. Next year, will he three-peat? So that becomes a big storyline. And another one that was, near and dear to my heart, I translated his autobiography, Eli Elezra. For the first couple weeks of the World Series of Poker, he was missing from action. His father had passed away after a lengthy illness. And Ellie was just, observing the mourning period, staying at home. Then he comes back, and the Jewish tradition is you sort of grow out your facial hair. You don't shave for the first month, and all of a sudden you see something is a little different. And then he goes and wins his 5th bracelet. Is already a Poker Hall of Famer. He wins the 10K PLO 8 and dedicated it to his father. And you see, a picture of Ellie with the beard, and it's the kind of thing that he should play, for many, many more years to come. But this particular bracelet to him was very special, and again, just a beautiful, very touching story to dedicate it to his late father.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great story. We were all so happy for him. And it was definitely one of those storybook endings for him. Chad, what about you?
From a media perspective, when you're on site doing these stories, I always like the storylines that develop that kind of put you on DEFCON 1, if you will, where all of a sudden you have to update your game. And there was a couple moments like that. So Phil Ivey making a run at his 11th bracelet, and 100K high roller was a very exciting moment for a number of reasons. Look, he's been at 10 bracelets for more than a decade. Nobody's taken a step towards Hellmuth in over a decade, right? Hellmuth was tied with Brunson and Ivey, and Johnny Chan. Weren't they all tied at 10 at one point?
Yep.
Hellmuth's continued to go on to number 16, while the rest have been stuck at 10. So Ivey coming back, it was just a very exciting time. Unfortunately, he ended up finishing runner-up to Alexis Ponikov's, but still 1.1 million. So that was exciting. And then speaking of Hellmuth, he does once or twice every summer, makes a run at a bracelet. This was chasing number 17. It was the 3K No Limit Hold'em final table. It really looked like he was going to get it done, but he didn't. He fell one spot short, and it was David Jackson denying him. So those two, the fills going deep was very exciting. And then kind of the opposite of it, Daniel Negreanu, he always makes a big deal of the World Series of Poker. I always make it a point to watch his vlogs every single day. I love to live vicariously through it. But this year, he just fell flat when it came to performance. He wasn't in the Player of the Year running in a serious contention. He had no major scores, never came close to sniffing a bracelet. I think he made maybe one final table at an online event or something. And it just was very uncharacteristic of Kid Poker. And so it was still entertaining. His vlogs were still great, but it was like hard not to feel for him, because usually he does put up a good showing.
Right. And you saw him during one of those things where he slammed his camera down, and just, you can see the frustration. And you know what, in some respects, it's good for the public to understand that he's even human, right? I mean, one of the best players and somebody who's worked on his game so much, understanding that these kids have done so much working with them and trying to, do what he does. sometimes the cards just don't go your way, no matter how good you are. I think it definitely made some people who watch Daniel, like their eyes open, like, wow, it's not as easy as it seems sometimes. So definitely some great storylines there. I'm going to throw in first the $1 million bounty. People talked about this, is this going to be good? There was a lot of buzz. The Win has been doing it for a while, but this was explosive. I interviewed Matt Glantz, who won the $1 million bounty, and he just said, this is just unbelievable. And he's predicting that next year there'll be multiple ones. PLO, he thinks it's going to happen, and I think that that's probably a good bet. The one thing about it is that when he pulled it, he said the whole room deflated because the $1 million was now gone. Right. So my suggestion is that wait till after dinner. Now I know that might be tough for some people, but listen, if you're trying to pull for when you're that person, they said you get 25K automatically. So it's a minimum. So when you go up to that stage, so they had iPads and they pressed a button. And if it came up under 25, like 5,000, you just knew on the spot you had 5,000. You don't have to go up and pull the thing. But if you pull the thing, you knew you were getting 25,000. So if someone said to you, hey, listen, we're not going to start pulling them until after dinner or whenever, I'm sure you'd be like, it's 25K minimum. I'll stick around for a little bit longer, that kind of thing. So that's the only thing with regards to that. Very minor, but I mean, how incredible and what a buzz there was about that, because you had some really weird strategies, right? Like usually it's like you could only get the bounties if you were in day 2. But if you're in day 2 with a short stack, you can't get a bounty. Right. So like Matt was saying, like people were playing really crazy at the end because they were like, I got to get chips if I want to get this bounty stuff. So it's very interesting, different strategies, obviously, as well. I do want to throw out one other thing is that was huge news there. It happened the night that the main event finished. And thankfully, this happened after the main event was concluded. Could you imagine if this happened while the main event was heads up? And I'm talking about the false rumor of an active shooter in Las Vegas. And it was absolute pandemonium. I interviewed a bunch of people, Blair Hinkle, Joe Cata, interviewed Preston McEwen, and they talked about how it was just literally people running at you. And just the panic and pandemonium that went on. But like I said, could you imagine if the main event final table was still going on and then this happened? I mean, what in the world would have happened? So definitely a story from the World Series. And thankfully it was false. And thankfully no one was really hurt. There were injuries. There were significant injuries. Actually, Daniel, you saw his hand was completely ripped up. I know some people's were knees and all that were bloodied, etc. Some people hurt their ankles, sprained the ankles, etc. So it definitely was an interesting scenario. Any other stories that you guys can think of? Robbie, anything else that kind of rings a bell for you?
Yeah, I touched upon it earlier. I did mention, Adam Friedman, and this is Mr. Dealer's Choice Invitational. Adam Friedman, he had won 3 in a row, 2018, 19, and 21. So he was the odds-on favorite to go ahead and do it again. He didn't, but then he goes and wins bracelet number 5. I mean, when you're talking about Helmuth 16, Ivy Chan at number 10, to have 5 bracelets is no simple task, and even in this age where they're awarding so many more of them. And he goes and wins the 10K stud. Similarly, Brian Hastings, he's only 33, 34 years old. He just won number 6 in the 10K.
Very quietly. It's amazing. It really is.
Right.
Yeah.
In the 10K deuce to 7 triple draw, who's got 6? Lanye Flack, I believe, had 6. Daniel Negreanu's got 6. Jeff Lissandros. I mean, these are you know, and you got Brian Hastings at 34, 33, 34 years old, winning number 6. So it's almost like, you know, you sort of see the all-time money list, you know, slowly, like, you know, those names are inching towards the top, the 30 millions, 40 millions. And now you see like these young guns who we heard about for so many years, they're getting bracelets number 4, 5, 6. It's kind of astounding to sort of witness these things. And, you know, kudos to them for, you know, emerging victorious, leading the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What about you, Chad? Anything else?
Yeah, there was one interesting story that was a very big what if moment for me. I mentioned earlier in the show that I liked it when, you know, we get on DEF CON 1, and that certainly happened in event number 26. I'm sorry, event number 41, which was just $1,000 super turbo bounty. And these are one-day events. They move very fast. This particular tournament got 2,227 entries. And then we got word that Neymar was going to play. Now, I know Neymar in the US isn't as big as it is worldwide, right? Neymar is one of the global athletes. He's a PokerStars ambassador. He's just, when it comes to sports, he's in the worldwide scheme, he's like a top 5 name, just very, very popular. And he jumps into this tournament and he starts building a stack. And before we know it, he's going super deep. I mean, I'm talking 9 tables left, 8 tables left, 7, 6. Like, it's like, okay, could he possibly win a World Series of Poker bracelet? Could he make the final table? And what would that do?
It could have been another moneymaker effect. It really could have been. It really could have been.
When we talk about things that could spark a boom, this was one of those rare instances. Unfortunately, you know, the storybook run came to an end in 49th place. You got almost $4,000 in cash. It was still super exciting. But for me, you know, being in this industry, just flirting with the idea of, man, if he could do this, what it would mean for our industry, that was very exciting.
And $4,000, that's like literally a minute of him playing on the pitch. But anyway, whatever the case is.
You wonder, did he stand in line to collect his own payout?
Yeah, exactly. He's like, give it to the dealers. Don't worry about it. I would say the thing for me, the other topic is kind of Hall of Fame. Like, we've had this issue with regards to the Hall of Fame. There is a tremendous backlog. Last year was Elliot Lesra, as Robbie said. This year, well-deserving. Lanye Flack, unfortunately, the late Lanye Flack passed away, but 6 bracelets, as you'd mentioned, and he was the winner. Chad, you have some background on Lanye or some thoughts on Lanye?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first off, let me say I agree with you. We've had many conversations over the years, Robbie as well, about this backlog. And I felt like I set the WSOP up perfectly to clear that backlog with the new move to the strip, with the ideas that I had. Unfortunately, didn't. They only inducted the 1, and the backlog is only going to get worse next year because there's a lot of poker players who are deserving who are about to turn 40. Now, that said, this year's list of 10 nominees was very strong, to the point where I had no really clear indication who might get in.
I agree.
That was exciting. Josh Aryeh, fresh off winning player of the year. You had Kathy Liebert getting a first-time nod, which I thought was well-deserved. Michael Mizrahi, he deserves it. I mean, I think we all know that, and it's only a matter of time before he gets in. Brian Rast was a first-time nominee. Matt Savage there again. And then, of course, Isai Scheinberg, who is, in my opinion, the #1 person who should get in. But I won't have any gripes about Lanye Flack. Him passing away was very unfortunate and very sad news. And I thought it was great for them to honor him by inducting him into the Poker Hall of Fame. Not too surprised, because right now the voting members are only the living members of the Hall of Fame. So, Doyle Brunson, Daniel Negreanu, Phil Hellmuth, those sort of guys. And they all knew Lanye. They all played with him, especially, in the 90s and 2000s when he was at his peak. And so I know it was an awesome induction. He deserved to be in there. And I know it meant a lot to his family. I had spoken with his daughter about it. And so I, for one, was very happy to see it and thought it was another, falling on Elliot Lesra last year, Lanye Flack this year. If you're only going to do one member at a time, I think both those picks are strong.
And speaking of only one member, unfortunately, that means there are a lot of people who missed out. And Robbie, what's your thoughts about those potential people that missed out, that totally deserve it and eventually will get in, but it could take a long time?
Right. And that just sort of points to that question I always ask, is like, and of course, with tremendous respect, let's take Lanye Flack. Was he any less deserving this year or last year? Did he had any specific results in the year before he passed? No. You look at Kathy Liebert. You look at Lon and Norm. You look at Matt Savage. All these things. All these players. That's the reason they're on the list of nominees as well. And you sort of ask yourself, oh, so now over this next year they're going to do something specific that, oh, okay, that's the difference maker. I'm doubtful. I mean, obviously, if one of them goes and wins the main event, or Michael Mizrahi wins like the PPC for a fourth time, okay, fine, and it's undeniable. But if time and just waiting for the next person to be inducted is the reason these people aren't inducted, in my opinion, that's not enough of a reason. So, as you had said, both of you've both written, amazing articles to this point of addressing the backlog. And, I think also when they go ahead and do, it's not just, the media saying these sorts of things, it's also the players as they turn 40. You've got already Brian Hastings with 6 bracelets, just like Lanye Flack had. And he's 33, 34 years old. So he's missing the, that he's not 40 years old criterion. But is he any less worthy at this point based on the incredible results he's had in his career? So perhaps it's time, after all of these years, after 50 plus years of the World Series of Poker with the move, that this is among, because the transition was so seamless, things are working and just tweaking here and there, perhaps some more attention could be paid to the Hall of Fame by those in charge of it, and say, okay, it's time to, clear the backlog. How are we going to do it? How many more inductees are we going to have? Is there going to be separated now between players, builders? Is there going to be different criteria? Because just like poker boomed, before the boom, there were only a much smaller contingent of players who did this for a living. You've got this explosion of players who've been doing it for a living for the last 2 decades, explosion of industry people who've put in 2 decades of work into poker. And so, start saying, okay, maybe it's time, even in conjunction with, bring in the living members of the Hall of Fame. Hey, guys, you've been around your Hall of Famers. Let's bring you into the process. How do we move forward and enhance the Hall of Fame, just like we've enhanced the World Series of Poker this past year?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, listen, the easiest thing is go back to 2 instead of 1. I mean, that's the easiest fix, right? Like, no one's going to complain. We did 2 for a while, and what's wrong with that? I wrote a column for Card Player magazine about it. I know Chad has written one for PokerNews as well, and clearing the backlog. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but my big summary is there are 20 people. Now, Lanye Flack would be off of that list. So there's 19 people that were either on the 2022 nomination list or from 2016 to 2021. That's 19 people. Every single one of those people is deserving of it. Absolutely. There's not one person on there that you go like, that's ridiculous. They're all deserving of it. So if you just went with those 19, it's going to be almost 2 decades before we clear that backlog. And just so everyone understands, here's who just turned 40: Anthony Zeno, Brian Rass, John Manette, Steve O'Dwyer, Adam Friedman. That's right there 5 more names. You've got Maria Ho, Vanessa Self, Nick Schulman, Ben Lamb, Jason Kuhn, Justin Bonomo, Isaac Haxton, Phil Galfond, Scott Seaver, Jason Mercier, Tom Dwan, Sean Deeb, Joe Cata, David Peters, all in the next 5 years. Tell me one of those that you wouldn't be like, I mean, I personally think that Michael Mizrahi, from what he has done, he's the criteria in my book of that first ballot Hall of Famer. And the fact that realistically, he's not going to get in for 3 to 4 years because of what's going on. And this is no slack on anyone who's gotten in, because everyone who's gotten in deserves to get in. And so it's just really definitely something they've got to look at. If anyone's interested, take a listen, take a look at it. I propose different committees: old timers committee, outside US committee, and then maybe like people who have made contributions. So anyway, hopefully that this will be solved and we can kind of move forward from it. So we've kind of looked at all of that. When we come back, we'll touch upon the main event and then maybe some other thoughts as well as we conclude our wrap up of the 2022 WSOP here with Chad Holloway and Robbie Strazynski.